Welcome to an unsettling journey into one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in true crime history. Today, we delve into the life and tragic death of Dorothy Jane Scott, a name that still echoes in the corridors of unsolved mysteries. Dorothy was a 32-year-old single mother living in Stanton, California. She worked as a secretary at two jointly owned stores, one that sold psychedelic items and another that sold head shop paraphernalia. Her life seemed ordinary, but beneath the surface, a dark shadow loomed. Dorothy had been receiving harrowing anonymous phone calls for months. The caller's voice was both familiar and terrifying, oscillating between professions of love and threats of violence. Despite reporting these calls to the police, they were unable to trace the source, but the nightmare didn't end there. On May 28, 1980, Dorothy vanished without a trace after attending a work meeting and helping a colleague to the hospital. Her car was found burning in an alleyway, but Dorothy was nowhere to be found. Weeks turned into months, and months into years, with no leads, no suspects, and no closure for her family. In this video, we will explore the disturbing details of Dorothy Jane Scott's disappearance and the chilling phone calls that continued to haunt her family even after her death. Before the terror that would come to define her final days, Dorothy Jane Scott led a life that many would describe as typical and unremarkable. Born on April 23, 1948, Dorothy grew up in a close-knit family in Anaheim, California. She was known to be a compassionate and gentle soul, always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Her friends and family described her as a devoted mother, a reliable friend, and a diligent worker. Dorothy was a single mother to her young son, Sean, whom she adored more than anything in the world. Her life revolved around ensuring that Sean had a loving and stable upbringing. She worked tirelessly as a secretary at two local stores, one that sold psychedelic items and another that catered to the counterculture with head shop paraphernalia. Despite the unconventional nature of her workplaces, Dorothy was known for her professionalism and dedication to her job. Outside of work, Dorothy's life was simple and quiet. She enjoyed spending time with her family, particularly her parents, Jacob and Vera Scott, who lived nearby and helped her with Sean. Dorothy was not one to seek out the spotlight. She preferred the comfort of her home and the company of her loved ones. She was active in her church and was known for her strong faith, which provided her with a sense of peace and purpose. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary life, Dorothy harbored growing concerns. She had confided in a few close friends about the unsettling phone calls she had been receiving. The voice on the other end was menacing and persistent, a dark cloud that hung over her otherwise bright and nurturing world. Despite her fears, Dorothy tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, focusing on her responsibilities as a mother and an employee. Her friends and family noticed a change in her demeanor as the calls continued. Dorothy became more anxious and wary, taking extra precautions to ensure her and Sean's safety. She changed her phone number multiple times, but the calls persisted, each one more disturbing than the last. The fear that had started as a small, nagging worry had grown into a constant, oppressive presence in her life. As we delve deeper into the tragic events that unfolded, it's important to remember who Dorothy Jane Scott was before the terror took hold. She was a loving mother, a dedicated worker, and a kind-hearted woman who did not deserve the fate that befell her. Her story is a stark reminder of how quickly a life can be shattered by the actions of a sinister and unknown force. As Dorothy Jane Scott went about her daily life, the cracks in her sense of security began to surface. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were sparse, just a few unsettling whispers that Dorothy tried to brush off. But as time went on, the calls became more frequent and increasingly disturbing. The voice on the other end was always the same, a menacing, low growl that sent chills down Dorothy's spine. The caller seemed to know intimate details about her life. He described her daily routine, the clothes she wore, and even the route she took to work. This knowledge left Dorothy feeling exposed and vulnerable. She began to notice strange things happening around her home and workplace. Items would be moved or go missing, only to reappear in odd places. Dorothy confided in her parents and close friends, expressing her growing fear and unease. The first major incident occurred one evening as she was leaving work. Dorothy noticed a figure lurking near her car. She quickly got into her vehicle and locked the doors, her heart pounding as she drove away. The experience left her shaken, but she tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence. However, the incidents continued to escalate. One night, Dorothy received a particularly chilling call. The voice on the other end described in graphic detail how he planned to harm her. He spoke of watching her, of knowing her every move. Dorothy was terrified. She changed her phone number, hoping to put an end to the harassment, but the calls persisted. It was clear that her stalker was determined and resourceful. Dorothy's anxiety grew with each passing day. She became more cautious, always looking over her shoulder and taking different routes to and from work. She even considered moving, but the thought of uprooting her life and her son's was daunting. Despite her best efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy, the fear was ever present, a dark cloud that loomed over her once peaceful existence. The final straw came when Dorothy found a threatening note left on her car windshield. The message was clear. Her stalker was getting bolder, and the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. Dorothy reported the incidents to the police, but without concrete evidence or a clear suspect, there was little they could do. She felt trapped, living in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. As Dorothy's world grew darker, the relentless pursuit of her stalker would soon reach a horrifying climax, culminating in a tragedy that would leave her family and friends devastated. The night of May 28, 1980 began like any other for Dorothy Jane Scott. She attended a staff meeting at the Swingers Psych Shop, the store where she worked. The meeting concluded around 9:00 p.m., and it was then that Dorothy noticed her coworker, Conrad Bostron, didn't look well. Conrad had been bitten by a spider earlier in the day and was experiencing severe symptoms. Dorothy, always the caring and responsible person, decided to drive Conrad to the emergency room at UC Irvine Medical Center. Their coworker, Pam Head, accompanied them. As they waited for Conrad to receive treatment, Dorothy stayed close, ensuring he was taken care of. It was during this time that she made a quick trip to the hospital's pharmacy to pick up a prescription for her coworker. Pam would later recall that Dorothy didn't seem particularly anxious or distressed, despite the troubling phone calls she'd been receiving for months. She appeared calm, focused on helping her friend. Around 11:00 p.m., with Conrad treated and ready to leave, Dorothy offered to bring her car around to the front of the hospital to pick up her friends. She walked out into the dimly lit parking lot, unaware that this would be the last time her friends would see her alive. Minutes passed, then half an hour, but Dorothy did not return. Pam and Conrad grew increasingly worried and decided to go outside to look for her. What they found was Dorothy's car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, speeding towards them before abruptly making a sharp turn out of the parking lot. They assumed she had an emergency and would return, but Dorothy never came back. Hours later in the early morning, Dorothy's car was discovered burning in an alleyway about 10 miles from the hospital. The sight of the burning car sent shockwaves through her family and friends. There was no sign of Dorothy, no clues to her. Whereabouts? The police were immediately involved, but the investigation yielded few answers. The discovery of the car only deepened the mystery, casting a dark shadow over what had already been an unsettling night. The night of her disappearance marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Dorothy's family and friends for years to come. The burning car was a grim symbol of the violence that had befallen her, but it offered no clues as to her whereabouts or the identity of her abductor. The police launched an extensive search, but there were no leads, no witnesses, and no evidence to point them in the right direction. Dorothy had simply vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family desperate for answers. The night Dorothy Jane Scott disappeared was not just a tragic moment in time. It was the beginning of a haunting mystery that continues to baffle investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike. In the days following Dorothy Jane Scott's disappearance, a sense of urgency and dread filled the air. Her family, friends, and co-workers were plunged into a state of shock and disbelief. How could someone so kind and caring simply vanish without a trace? The initial hours were crucial, and the search for Dorothy began almost immediately. The police, recognizing the potential severity of the situation, launched a thorough investigation. They retraced Dorothy's steps, starting from the hospital parking lot where she was last seen. The discovery of her burning car intensified the search efforts, but it also complicated the investigation. With no immediate signs of a struggle or clear evidence, the case became a perplexing puzzle. Detectives interviewed everyone who had been in contact with Dorothy that night. Her co-workers, Conrad Bostrom and Pam Head, recounted the events leading up to her disappearance. They described Dorothy's calm demeanor, her selfless act of driving Conrad to the hospital, and the eerie sight of her car speeding away before disappearing into the night. Their accounts provided a timeline, but few concrete leads. The police also delved into Dorothy's life, hoping to uncover any potential motives or suspects. They learned about the menacing phone calls she had been receiving for months. These calls, filled with threats and vile comments, painted a chilling picture of a stalker who had been fixated on her. Yet, despite this disturbing revelation, the identity of the caller remained a mystery. Flyers with Dorothy's picture were distributed throughout the community, and her case was featured in local news broadcasts. The hope was that someone, somewhere, had seen or heard something that could lead to a breakthrough. Tips poured in, but many led to dead ends. The community rallied around Dorothy's family, offering support and assistance in any way they could. The police also explored the possibility that Dorothy's abductor might have been someone she knew. They investigated her acquaintances, co-workers, and even customers from the stores where she worked. Despite their efforts, no solid suspects emerged. The lack of physical evidence and eyewitness accounts made it difficult to narrow down the list of potential perpetrators. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family was living a nightmare. Her parents, Jacob and Vera Scott, were tormented by the unknown fate of their daughter. They clung to the hope that she was still alive, but the fear of what might have happened to her was ever present. The stalker's continued phone calls only added to their anguish as he taunted them with cryptic messages and cruel remarks. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation seemed to stall. The police remained vigilant, but the trail had gone cold. Despite the lack of progress, Dorothy's family and friends refused to give up. They continued to search for answers, holding on to the hope that one day the truth would be revealed. The search for Dorothy Jane Scott was not just a quest for a missing person, it was a desperate plea for justice and closure. As the investigation into Dorothy Jane Scott's disappearance dragged on without any breakthroughs, a new, horrifying chapter began to unfold. The Scott family, already gripped by fear and uncertainty, started receiving a series of chilling phone calls. These calls were not from a concerned citizen or a well-wisher. They were from the very person who seemed to hold the key to Dorothy's fate. The first call came just a week after Dorothy vanished. Jacob and Vera Scott, Dorothy's parents, answered the phone to hear a male voice on the other end. The voice was calm, almost taunting, as it delivered its message. "I've got her!" The call was brief, but it sent shivers down their spines. Who was this caller, and why was he tormenting them? Over the next several months, the calls continued. Each time, the caller would provide just enough information to suggest he knew what had happened to Dorothy, but never enough to lead the police to him. He would describe details of her life and disappearance that were not public knowledge, convincing the family that he was indeed involved. The calls alternated between cruel taunts and eerie silence, leaving the Scotts in a constant state of terror. The police tried to trace the calls, but the caller was always one step ahead. He used payphones, never staying on the line long enough to be tracked. Despite their best efforts, the authorities could not capture the elusive voice behind the torment. The psychological impact on Dorothy's family was profound. Each ring of the phone brought a mix of hope and dread. Hope that it might be news of Dorothy, and dread that it would be the caller, delivering another cryptic message. The constant harassment took a severe toll on their mental health, but they refused to give up. They hoped that one day, the caller would slip up and reveal something that could lead to Dorothy. In one particularly chilling call, the voice claimed that Dorothy was still alive. "She's right here," he said, "but you'll never find her." The cruelty of these words was unbearable, leaving the Scotts oscillating between hope and despair. They clung to any possibility of finding her, but the lack of concrete information left them in a perpetual state of limbo. The caller's games didn't stop with the family. He began contacting Dorothy's co-workers and friends, further spreading the fear and confusion. No one felt safe, and the community was plunged into a state of heightened anxiety. Who was this person, and why was he fixated on Dorothy? As time went on, the calls became less frequent, but the damage had been done. The psychological scars left by the caller's torment were deep and lasting. The Scott family lived in a state of perpetual fear, haunted by the voice on the other end of the line. The chilling phone calls added another layer of complexity to an already baffling case. They provided a glimpse into the mind of a deeply disturbed individual, someone who took pleasure in the suffering of others. Despite the passage of time, the identity of the caller remains one of the most perplexing aspects of Dorothy Jane Scott's disappearance. As the tormenting phone calls continued to haunt Dorothy Jane Scott's family, the case seemed to be at a standstill. Months turned into years, and the hope of finding Dorothy alive began to fade. The Scott family, though battered and broken, held on to the slim chance that they might one day see her again. But then, in a cruel twist of fate, their worst fears were confirmed. On August 6, 1984, nearly 4 years after Dorothy's disappearance, a construction worker made a grim discovery in the Santa Ana Canyon. While clearing debris for a construction project, he stumbled upon skeletal remains. The authorities were called in immediately, and the area was cordoned off. The remains were found alongside a turquoise ring and a watch, items that Dorothy's family would later identify as belonging to her. The discovery was a devastating blow to the Scott family. The remains were sent to the coroner's office for examination, and dental records confirmed what they had dreaded. The remains were indeed those of Dorothy Jane Scott. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, but due to the advanced state of decomposition, many details about her final moments remained a mystery. The news of the discovery spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. Dorothy's friends and co-workers were left in a state of disbelief and sorrow. The vibrant, caring woman they had known was now confirmed to have met a tragic and violent end. The discovery of her remains brought a sense of closure, but it also reignited the pain and anguish of her loss. For the Scott family, the confirmation of Dorothy's death was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they finally had an answer to the agonizing question of what had happened to her. On the other hand, the reality of her murder was almost too much to bear. The chilling phone calls, the burning car, and now, the discovery of her remains painted a harrowing picture of a life cut short by a cruel and calculating killer. Despite the discovery, the identity of Dorothy's murderer remains unknown. The police continued their investigation, but the trail had gone cold. The case, already shrouded in mystery and terror, now had a final, tragic chapter. The Scott family, though devastated, remained resolute in their quest for justice. They hoped that one day, the person responsible for Dorothy's death would be brought to light and held accountable for their heinous crime. The discovery of Dorothy's remains marked the end of one chapter, but opened another. It was a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring impact of violence. As the discovery of Dorothy Jane Scott's remains brought a tragic closure to her disappearance, it also reignited the quest for answers. Who was responsible for this heinous act? Despite the lack of concrete evidence, several theories and suspects have emerged over the years, each adding a layer of complexity to an already mystifying case. One prevailing theory is that Dorothy's stalker was someone she knew, possibly a disgruntled acquaintance or a frequent customer at one of the stores where she worked. This theory stems from the stalker's apparent knowledge of her daily routine and intimate details about her life. Some believe it could have been a former boyfriend or an obsessive admirer who couldn't handle rejection. Another theory points to a coworker or someone within her professional circle. Dorothy's job at the two stores exposed her to a wide array of people, some of whom might have developed an unhealthy fixation on her. The fact that her stalker knew her every move suggests a level of proximity that only someone close to her could achieve. There are also those who speculate that the stalker could have been a complete stranger, a random predator who fixated on Dorothy for reasons known only to him. This theory is supported by the psychological profile of the stalker, which suggests a deeply disturbed individual who derived pleasure from inflicting fear and pain. Over the years, several individuals have come under suspicion, but none have been definitively linked to Dorothy's murder. The lack of physical evidence and eyewitness accounts has made it difficult for investigators to narrow down the list of suspects. Each lead seems to lead to a dead end, leaving the case shrouded in uncertainty. Despite the numerous theories, one thing remains clear. Dorothy Jane Scott was targeted by a calculating and relentless individual. The psychological torment she endured, coupled with the tragic end she met, points to a perpetrator with a sinister and twisted mindset. The identity of this person remains one of the most haunting aspects of the case. As the years have passed, the hope for a breakthrough has not dimmed. Advances in forensic technology and renewed interest in cold cases offer a glimmer of hope that one day, the person responsible for Dorothy's death will be brought to justice. Until then, the theories and suspects serve as a reminder of the many unanswered questions that still surround this chilling case. The mystery of Dorothy Jane Scott's murder continues to captivate and confound, leaving her family, friends, and true crime enthusiasts yearning for closure. As the years have passed, the case of Dorothy Jane Scott has remained a haunting enigma. Despite numerous efforts by law enforcement, private investigators, and amateur sleuths, the identity of her stalker and murderer continues to elude us. The passage of time has not dimmed the memory of Dorothy's tragic fate. If anything, it has only intensified the quest for justice. In the decades following her disappearance, new tips and leads have trickled in, but none have led to a breakthrough. Advances in forensic technology have provided a glimmer of hope, yet the crucial piece of evidence needed to solve the case remains just out of reach. The tireless dedication of Dorothy's family and friends has kept the investigation alive, but the weight of unanswered questions is a burden they continue to carry. The media has played a significant role in keeping Dorothy's story in the public eye. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and articles have all explored the chilling details of her case, ensuring that her name is not forgotten. Each retelling serves as a reminder of the terror she endured and the injustice of her unsolved murder. Despite the lack of resolution, the hope for answers persists. Cold case units periodically review the evidence, looking for new angles and potential breakthroughs. The advent of DNA testing and other forensic advancements holds promise, but until a definitive match is found, the case remains open and unresolved. Dorothy Jane Scott's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring impact of violence. Her legacy is one of strength and resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who loved her. As we continue to seek the truth, we honor Dorothy by keeping her memory alive and refusing to let her case fade into obscurity. The ongoing mystery of Dorothy Jane Scott serves as a call to action for all who seek justice. It is a reminder that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the pursuit of truth and closure is a journey worth undertaking. One day, we hope to find the answers that have eluded us for so long and bring peace to Dorothy's family and all who have been touched by her story. The story of Dorothy Jane Scott is a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring impact of violence. It is a case that has left an indelible mark on all who have come across it, a chilling tale that continues to resonate deeply. As we conclude this exploration into Dorothy's tragic fate, we are reminded of the importance of vigilance, community support, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Though Dorothy's case remains unsolved, we must not let her memory fade into obscurity. Her story is not just about the terror she faced, but also about the strength and resilience of those who loved her. It is a call to action for all of us, to remain vigilant, to support victims of stalking and harassment, and to advocate for advancements in forensic technology that can help bring closure to cold cases like Dorothy's. If you have any information about Dorothy Jane Scott's case, no matter how insignificant it may seem, please contact the authorities. Your tip could be the missing piece that finally brings justice to Dorothy and peace to her family. Let's honor Dorothy's memory by continuing to share her story, raising awareness about the dangers of stalking, and supporting efforts to solve this and other unsolved cases. Together, we can keep her legacy alive and work towards a future where justice is served and victims are remembered for their strength and courage. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. And remember, justice may be delayed, but with our collective efforts, it is never out of reach.